I'm hanging off the resting ledge. The anticipation is building in my stomach. The imposing headwall of Rhapsody is hanging over me. There's no escaping for what's to come. The first 2/3 of the route passed quickly. Now I'm hanging off the sloping ledge about a third from the top, and this is where the real climb begins. Above me, there's no more gear. It's run out. The hardest climbing is yet to come, and it finishes with an 8A boulder problem. I've got mixed feelings. On one hand, I'm excited, but my mind starts racing. I know that I've fallen off the head wall many times. I know how intimidating that fall is, and I know how much this route means to me. The pressure feels heavy, and every time I fail, the pressure builds. So I'll bring my attention back to something simple, my breathing. Deep breaths in and slow breaths out. Because if I don't quiet my mind here, I'm about to fight two battles. The physical challenge of the climb and the noise inside my head. Climbing has shown me this many times. The hardest part isn't always the rock. Very often, it's the mind. And that's exactly what this podcast is about. It's called A Climber's Mind. The focus is on the psychological side of climbing. Doubt, obsession, failure, and growth. In episode 1, I'm going to talk about who I am, how I got into climbing, and why I started this podcast. So my name's Matt Wright. I'm a multidiscipline climber, I'm a remote outdoor performance coach, and I've been climbing for around 10 years. Some of the major routes that I've done are Rhapsody and Lexicon, both the 11, Hubble 9A, and Serenata V15. It's easy to list these routes as big achievements, but the reality is each ascent was a long process. Those processes included doubt, frustration, reflection, and learning. Growth matters more than grades. For example, the first 7A plus that I ever did, called Pleasant Valley Sunday, that climb taught me patience, observation, and movement. I started climbing at age 16 in the South Wales valleys. I took a slightly different path into climbing to many. I started climbing outdoors and completely on my own. Some of the early days, I remember traversing the base of these sandstone quarries, and I'd solo relatively easy routes in my trainers. Didn't really know what I was doing, I had no one to teach me, but it didn't take long before I decided to buy my first pair of climbing shoes, get some chalk and some sport climbing gear. Then the obsession really began. Due to the lack of climbing partners, I taught myself how to top rope solo, and this was great because it meant that I could climb alone, I could experiment with movement, and I could build really solid foundations of a technique. I decided to set myself an early goal of climbing 8A within a year. I didn't actually quite manage it, but I did almost top rope solo one. Eventually I did manage to lead my first 8A after 18 months, which I was really happy about. And then after that, unfortunately I started to run out of climbs locally, but that led to a new obsession, finding new routes. That idea really fascinated me. The thought of coming across unclimbed lines, and not just lines, crags. These bits of rock that no one's ever touched before, and the curiosity of filling in the gaps. Still today, new routing is absolutely my favourite style of climbing. I've put up new routes all over the UK, North Wales, the Lake District, and a lot over Scotland. For me, climbing is a lot about discovery. I'm not talking about big expeditions or remote mountains. For me, discovery is quite simple. Standing underneath a climb, trying to understand it, and figuring out complex beta. I often ask myself the questions, why does it feel impossible? Why do others make it look so easy? There was a video online of the first ever project that I had, Pleasant Valley Sunday. Something that I observed from the video is that the climber in it made it look really easy. But we were struggling. Another climber walked past us and said that our hips were hanging out in mid-air. That comment explained a few things to me. There were some fundamental problems in my climbing. I think what was happening is I was trying to pull between the holds, but my body positioning was wrong. The realisation was that my skeleton should be supporting my weight. I need to be precise on my feet, and my hips need to rotate into the wall. Climbing isn't just about finger strength, it's about attention to detail. Still to this day, attention to detail is very present in my climbing. I've got a project called Rain Shadow, and I'm facing a lot of challenges with it. I'm hoping it'll be my second 9A. It's at a crag called Malham Cove in North Yorkshire, England, and I've been trying it on and off for about 5 years now. When I first tried it, to be honest, I was miles away. I noticed that it exposed a real weakness in my climbing. A lot of the routes that I'd done previously, Mecca, my first 8B+, Make It Funky, my first 8C, Evolution, my first 8C+, they were all very crimpy, relied heavily on full crimping, whereas Range Shadow is a lot about pinches, drags, undercuts, and the crux is an 8A boulder problem. To me, it felt pretty sustained and power endurance based. It was just far longer and more sustained than anything else that I'd done before. One thing I realised is there was a real gap in my skill set. I had to train new grip types. I had to diversify my climbing style. These days, I'm starting to feel pretty close. I think I can do it, but to be honest, it's been a mega journey. One thing that I've observed about climbing performance is that physical strength determines your ceiling, the upper limits of what's possible. But something else defines the other side. Your technique, tactics and mindset determine the floor, how much of that strength you're able to express. Your real performance sits somewhere in between those two. And interestingly, most climbers aren't limited by their ceiling, they're limited by the floor. But there's some good news. Improving your floor is often the fastest way to climb harder. If there's one thing that climbing has taught me, it's that clarity must come before effort. Effort is your most valuable resource, and misused effort wastes huge amounts of time and energy. A common mistake is that climbers tend to try harder before asking why they're stuck. Real progress begins with diagnosis. You need to understand the possible limiters. Are you held back by observation, physical capacity, technique, mental blocks, or is it part of your lifestyle? Often, several are involved. But usually, there's only one primary limiter, and understanding that unlocks progress. I've created my own diagnostics tool called the Roadmap. It's a framework to help climbers identify their biggest limiters. It's free to download. Just see the link in the podcast description. I decided to start this podcast because I want to talk about the real process of climbing hard. Not just highlight reels. I want to talk about the reality of doubt, frustration, failure, and long efforts before success. Social media, unfortunately, is mostly about success. The reality is that 90% of climbing hard is failure. Failure teaches us lessons and it builds resilience. In future episodes, I want to take a deep dive into projecting strategies. I want to explore the lessons that I've learned from my climbing. I want to talk about training mistakes, have conversations with other climbers, and take a deep dive into historic routes. I'd also like to share stories from my projects and talk about some of the new routes that I've got. But my main goal of this podcast is to explore the mind of climbing. For me, climbing is both an escape and a struggle. It brings great reward, but also suffering. But it's through climbing that I'm able to reflect, learn, and grow. The biggest barriers are rarely just the climbs. Often, it's our own mind. If exploring the mind of climbing interests you, this podcast is for you. As I mentioned previously, if you want to learn about my climbing philosophy, visit the link below. Thanks for listening. This is episode 1 of A Climber's Mind.